Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. My name is Braden Knutson. I'll be your host for this webinar today. We'd like to thank you for joining us. We have a couple of polls down at the bottom we'd ask you to fill out for us as we go through a few of our announcements. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, February 23rd, so this Thursday at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And that webinar will be by James Tanner, so we invite you to join us then as well. It'll be a pretty good one. And also on Friday, we have a Family Search Family Tree question and answer session with Catherine Grant. So that's February 24th at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And we have a link on our schedule that you can submit questions ahead of time. So we'd ask you to submit questions ahead of time if you do plan on joining, but if you don't have a chance, you can also write in questions at the live webinar as well. So today we'll be pleased to hear from Jessica Hicks, who will be giving a presentation titled Scanning Basics Before You Start. Jessica Hicks is the Department Assistant at the BYU Family History Library, otherwise known as the Religion and Family History area of the Harold B. Lee Library. She's worked at the library for 9 years as staff, including 5 years in her current position. Her previous work in interlibrary loan at BYU and as a scanning grunt at Ancestry.com helped introduce her to digitization. She also has a master's in library science from the University of North Texas. So we'll turn the time over to Jessica now, and as the screen's loading, remind you that there is a comments box on the upper right-hand corner and a questions box in the lower right-hand, and so feel free to write in with any questions, and we'll make sure that they're all answered by the end of the presentation.
Good evening, this is Jessica. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about how to focus on, thank you. It sounds weird to hear Braden's my voice in Braden's headset. Anyway, moving on. So a swift overview of what we're going to be going over this evening is planning your project, finding your format, preparing materials. Very, very briefly, I'm going to be going over scanner options. And then last but never least, planning your actual trip. So one disclaimer that I need to give about this is that, as always, you want to customize your project to your specific needs, and hence my quote of Frank Sinatra, do it your own way. So whatever works for you, take from this. All right, so in regards to planning your project, you need to ask yourself some questions. For instance, what's your vision? How do you plan to access it? How are you going to share it with other people? All of these are going to help you decide which options are best. And so for even for how to organize, you're going to be looking at what groups, events, or chronology or names you'd like to use. Size does very much matter in this instance. Larger projects you're going to need to treat differently than smaller ones. It's going to affect how much data you need to purchase, and especially the level of detail you need to go into for that. So an example of this would be that if you had several shoe boxes, that wouldn't need to be as in depth. We'll talk about consistency and naming conventions in a little bit, but for anyone who's not familiar, a file is one specific item, be it a picture or a document. In a folder, you can put multiple files into it on your computer. I do get those questions, so like I said, this is an introductory webinar, ergo some things might be a little bit more simplistic. Just bear with me. So you want your files grouped in folders small enough to narrow it down, but still have enough files in those folders to warrant that said folder. For instance, you don't want just 3 files in each folder. Even with a shoebox full of pictures, that's going to be a lot of folders, and that's going to be exhausting to create. You also want to make sure that when you are doing your file naming and your folder naming, that you use correct spelling and avoid any personal codes to allow for searching, and especially if you're going to be sharing these, which we would hope that you would share your hard work with other people. right? You want them to be able to search it. They don't have to learn a specific code. So an example of this would be, for instance, in the 1880s, the Floyd family lived in England, New York, and Pennsylvania. So the all-encompassing idea is that it's the Floyd family, and under that would be the 1880s, and then after that would be the three places. So you want to go from big to small groups. And so in this case, it's, of course, the family, the date, and then the location. So an example of this is over to the side. You've got your main folder of Floyd's, then a subfolder of 1880s, and then 3 further subfolders of those places. Now you can also go deeper into that and make sure that they all have even more in-depth naming. So for instance, here you can see the bottom subfolders, don't lose those titles. So you're always going to have the name and the date associated. Most important, make sure that you keep that same file organization. And like I said, this includes the subfolders. Don't give up on your efforts. Make sure you follow through. Now, a word on file naming itself. Just be aware that computers are terribly literal creatures. If you tell it something, it's going to do it. So some tricks to know about that would be understand that it depends on how you are actually viewing that said data. And we'll talk about how to use that in Windows in a little bit. So for instance, exact punctuation is important for searching. It also will change the order of things depending on where it goes. So for instance, if you had something alphabetized and organized by alphabetization, the numbers actually come before letters. It goes numerically and then by letters, right? And so you need to understand that. Also, you need to understand that zeros are considered a character by a computer, meaning that 001 space image is not the same to a computer as 0001 space image. Those are completely different files to that computer, to any computer, and depending on it, it'll go in different places in the hierarchy where you'll see it in your viewing screen. Nothing, meaning using the spacebar, comes before something, which means basically just about anything, a character, be it a letter or a number. That means if you miss putting in a space in one of your naming, understand that that's going to go to the very bottom, right? So just understand that these have long-standing effects on your file naming. Now, naming conventions in general, this is where we're going to talk about consistency. And the biggest thing is to just choose one and stick with it. For instance, dates, you can write dates in multiple ways. Here are 3 examples over on the side. Be aware that that second example, that 1985.2.23, is indeed different than the 1985.02.23. Just like I said, 0 is a character. Names and spellings. Make sure you choose one and you stick with it. Otherwise, if you're trying to search for that person, you're going to be searching however many times you changed it. So try to keep it as consistent as possible. Punctuation, like I was saying, changes the whole game. So Luke's first haircut, for example, you could search Luke, first haircut, but not Luke's without the apostrophe. You have to keep in that apostrophe every time if you want to search by that. You want to maintain the same level of detail. If you're always going to have somebody's name, a place, and a date, just keep that going. Otherwise, you'll get very turned around. And of course, just like before, you want to make sure that you keep the order the same with folders and the chronology. Okay. When you start scanning things, you'll find that different softwares have different restrictions for file naming. Just be aware of that and make sure that you're ready to adjust your plan if necessary. So an example of this in our own library would be what's called the Optic Book flatbeds. We have 4 of these, and they're wonderful scanners. However, they hate punctuation. They just do not like it. They'll give you a little pop-up that says, try again. And you just have to nix the punctuation. Another example is the Kodak PS80 sheet feed, which we've used for pictures. And it only allows some punctuation, not all punctuation. So be aware that what you have decided on won't always be what's available to you. You can, of course, go back and rename files, but there are some positives and negatives. Of course, the positive is that your file names are exactly what you want them to be. The con is that if you're doing it by hand, one by one, it's quite time-consuming and frustrating. There are some softwares out there, such as IrfanView, that can do a batch conversion and a file renaming. I'm not going to talk about that further here, but just be aware that it is out there. IrfanView is a free program, and I might be running a small webinar on that in the future, depending how that goes. Now here we get to viewing options. So this is regards to how you're viewing your data in Windows. So depending on what viewing options you have selected, it's useful for changing the searching and sorting parameters. And I'm going to go through all of this, don't worry. And of course, it also depends on the Windows version. So I actually have examples from both Windows 7 and Windows 10. So just be aware of that as I go through here. So first, this is a screen that resembles Windows 7. You can tell that I wasn't very interested in doing original names here. I've got, your new folder happening. So this is obviously just an example. But if I wanted to get some more details going here, it would be easy. If you notice, I do not have the thumbnail screen up right here. I've got each file goes across the board with name, date, type, size, and tags. But if you'll notice, to get to that detailed view, you actually have, I'm going out of order, sorry. Down at the bottom, the strength of the detailed view is that you don't lose the thumbnail. It's a little bit smaller, but it is down there at the bottom, and you can see a lot of information as well. Up here is where you can change the different views and layouts. So for instance, that's the detailed view. And here is what that button will expand to once you click on it. Now this would be the normal Windows 10 version. You can tell there's a little bit more going on here. To go to the detailed view, you actually have to go up to the View tab and select that. And then you can see all of the layouts right there. You can see how my cursor is hovering over details, and that's highlighted in blue. So you can use that, and yes, I think we might be missing an image, but it's good. So that's one way to do it. Now, for instance, this is where naming importance comes into play. Sorting and searching inside the folder or in subsequent subfolders can make it a lot easier to organize your data and to get kind of a review of what you've done. So for instance, I mentioned these before. You can tell that that these images are actually sorted by name. They're sorted alphabetically. Remember, numbers come before letters. So anytime that your file naming ends with a 00 number, or just any sort of a number, it's always going to default to that if the rest of the file prefix is the same. You can see these are all called image 00 something. That's what I'm talking about. You can tell that it's obviously not sorted by date because I've got some 2017 photos mixed in there. It's not chronological at all. And the same thing you can see over on the side, that side size is the same. You've got a variety of sizes going on, all interspersed. So if you wanted to search this folder, you would actually put your search parameters up there in that small field where it says search your new folder. So if you kept with the same naming conventions, then you wouldn't have to worry about searching it wrong or finding it wrong. Also, if you ever need to, you can actually right-click on those headings, so like where it says name, date, type, size, and tags, and you can see the columns then, and then you can select which columns you want viewed, so you can expand those sorts. Whereas in Windows 10, you're going to go back to that View tab up there, and you'll notice I actually have the layout on large icons instead of detailed, but I can go over to Sort right over here, and I can select how I want them sorted while still viewing those large icons. So if you want that visual representation, that's completely possible. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about formats. As always, like I said, with planning your project, you want to first have a vision of what you want to do so that when you are finding your format, it'll make a bit more sense. So for instance, if you have your end goal in mind, that is going to greatly help you with that. For instance, if you just wanted to put things on Family Search, you might be a little different. You might act a little different than if it was an archival copy. Now, the three main formats that I'm going to talk about are JPEG, TIFF, and PDF. So let's get started. Each one has pros and cons. I'll go over them very briefly. Like I said, this is an introduction. This is not all-encompassing whatsoever. So the first two, JPEG and TIFF, are image files. And so, for instance, a JPEG is known for several things. Its biggest pro is that it is a small file size due to the compression. A JPEG goes through about a 7-step compression scheme every time you open and close it. But the problem with that is that because of that opening and closing, if you change it each time, so if you were to open it, edit it, close it, and by closing it, saving it, you would be making the image go through that compression scheme different. And so because of that, it can lose some quality and lose some details. So it is not ideal for multiple editing sessions. But as long as you're just leaving it be and maybe do 1 or 2 edits, it should be just fine. A TIFF image, on the other hand, is known for mostly the fact that it is a less compressed file format, so it's very good for multiple editings. It's going to retain all of that information exponentially longer. The con goes hand in hand with that. The file size can be huge, and because of that, high quantities of memory will be needed. So one thing to keep in mind is how much data you'll need. Going on, the only document and multi-page files that I'm going to talk about really is PDF. It's universal, it's very popular, and the reader is free. So that's why we're going to focus on this one. Its pro is that it is a very small file size. It was meant originally to transfer electronic documents, so it was meant for email. And like I said, those multi-pages inside that exact file cannot be separated unless you specifically do so in the file, meaning you don't lose any information and you don't have to send people dozens and dozens of files. You can put all those pages into one and just send them one. There are also a lot of options with PDF. One of them is the searchable text option, but you need to do that with the Pro software. And that is the one con that I would say, is that all of the editing abilities are tied up, of course, in the software that you have to purchase instead of the free reader. Let's talk for a minute about resolution. And no, we're not talking about New Year's. It's February and you're safe. So when we're talking about resolution, we're talking about something called DPI, which stands for dots per inch. Now this is in reference to the tiny dots that make up images themselves. And so just like those tiny dots were printed out, when they're scanned, the scanners also scan them in dots. And when you see them on your screen, they're called pixels. So one of the most popular resolutions for just about any file is about 400 dpi. This is always going to give you a good result, and it's considered in some circles as archival quality. One second. Just dry throat there. 600 is usually the top range of most scanners. This is a wonderful quality. If you have a 600 scanner, that is gold. Most people just think the bigger the better. Well, the bigger, also the bigger, so you're going to be dealing with massive file sizes. It does go beyond 600. There is the 1200 DPI and beyond that as well. But just be aware that not all scanners that profess that they do 1200 and above DPI are doing it actually, meaning their scanner can actually pick up 1200 DPI. It might be something called interpolated, and that is where the scanner will actually take that information, give it to the software, and the software will then run an algorithm so that it beefs up the pixels, meaning it can do an actual scan at 600 and then digitally it fills it up so that it's 1200. So just be aware that 600 is a wonderful resolution, and that might be all that you need, depending on what you need. For instance, we only suggest 1200 dpi for slides and negatives. That's because you're dealing with such a tiny, tiny picture to begin with. So some of the factors for resolution to understand are, of course, the usage. If you are going to be using the picture to print out on a giant banner for your family reunion, then you're probably going to want 1200 dpi, because otherwise if you blow the picture up that big on the banner, you're going to see what's called pixelation, which is where it's grainy. Of course, the size of the original, like I was talking about with slides and negatives, when it's very, very small, you want to up the resolution if you can. Your storage capacity, are you going to bottom out by doing these really high resolutions with the TIFF? And of course, the scanner capability. Just be aware that these are questions that you want to ask. Data storage. Like I said, the size depends on the file types, the number of files, and of course the resolution. Those will all go hand in hand. I am not going to give you figures because file types can depend on a plethora of factors, including the colors, and the variety of colors in the picture itself can really up the file size. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert. Regarding the physical data storage, there's external hard drives, like you can see to the right there. And then there's also thumb drives and jump drives. Now, don't discount these because those chips are getting very powerful, and they can get a lot of gigs on there, though. But they're not quite as powerful, obviously, as the external hard drives, which can do terabytes easily, if not more. You also want to consider cloud storage, and so something like your email storage or Google Drive, as well as the third-party subscriptions. There are a lot of options out there. Some of them advertise more security than others, and depending on what your needs are for your files, you should look into what fits. Best practice, I would say, to have a combination of both. Have a physical, hard, digital copy, and then also have a digital cloud version as well. All right, so let's switch gears and let's talk about preparing your materials. So you want to make sure that you organize and label things how you want to scan them. You want to make sure that you can clean and remove any dust, fingerprint oils, and any sort of fragment that might be there. These things sadly degrade over time, and depending on how it is, originally it could be falling apart, so you'll also want to protect those as well. So for instance, pictures, if you feel comfortable with it, you can choose to remove them from the album. Um, and the reason why you would want to do that, especially if it has the old adhesive that kind of crumbles away, just be aware that putting that through the scanner, that can cause streaks on the scanner. So if you feel comfortable with doing that, you're welcome to. Of course, you want to dust the edges, even if it's been in a photo box, just standing on end the whole time. You still want to dust those edges off. You never know what's gotten in there, and that's going to reduce streaking when you scan. Documents, for instance, it really depends on how fragile it is, on how you would scan it. Like I said, if it's something that's falling apart, you definitely want to put it in a plastic sleeve. You don't want to be carrying around in a tote without a little extra protection so it gets there. Removing staples. This is a big one, and this will really make you a favorite of whomever you're scanning with or whoever equipment you're using. Every time that you put metal with glass, metal is going to win and glass is going to come away a little beaten up. I know you're not sitting there and nobody's like grabbing the staple and scratching it all over the glass, but it does slowly accumulate and it can eventually degrade the images. Slides, the biggest thing I can do for slides, suggest for slides, is to take them out of their metal frames or carousels. And like I said, remember, this is what is going to be fitting your own personal needs. Some people don't feel comfortable doing this because they don't want them out of order. Just be aware that these are time savers to help you spend your time scanning. One very specific note that I wanted to make is to avoid pressurized air. That's right. So the chemicals in the pressurized air can actually leave residue on your slides, on your pictures, and so those can be very damaging to it. And plus, it's very expensive. Instead, we would suggest a camera blower brush alternative. You can see over on the side there. That is a small little kit that we have that we can check out to our patrons. There is a rocket blower right there, that weird thing with the red point, and then also a brush separate. Those are really useful for getting in and getting the little pieces of dust out of slides. So that's what we would suggest you do. You're welcome to purchase your own, or if you're coming to our library, you're more than welcome to use ours. Just save yourself a bit of money. And like I said, scanner options, I'm going to be very brief here, very general, because I don't want to show favoritism, and I haven't seen all that's out there. But in general, there's two types. There's flatbeds and sheet feeds. So for instance, here's some examples of the flatbeds in our area. This one is that optic book that I was telling you about that doesn't like punctuation in the file naming. Otherwise, it's a great machine. Also, here's another example of a flatbed. This is one of our small slide scanners. And so that can do that high DPI, right? So there's all sorts of variety out there. So these are the flatbed strengths. They are very good for fragile items. They're good for anything that's layered. So things that are fragile or layered, you really don't want to put through a sheet feed. If it's torn or damaged, literally all you're doing is going to be opening up that lid and gently setting the document or picture right there on top of the glass. So that's very minimal, going to be very safe on that. Also, if you have any preview edits that you want to make or digital adjustments, the flatbeds are the way to go. Otherwise, the other option are sheet feeds. So here's an example of the Kodak PS80 that we have in our area. We have two of these, and this is specifically for photos, whereas this is the Canon, and this is for documents. The Canon, for instance, is our workhorse, but the thing to know about this machine, for instance, is that you put the documents on the bottom and it goes through all the way around as a 180 and comes out the top, so you can see why you wouldn't want anything fragile to go in there. So the sheet feeds are good for items with very good condition. You've got a lot of pages and you don't need to do a lot of preview edits because once it's through, it's scanning it. It's already going through and it's done. All right, let's move on ahead. Planning your trip. These are just some of the things that I've come across in my years working here. It's not always easy to come into campus. Um, just getting some parking can be kind of confusing, so I just wanted to maybe help give some food for thought. So calling ahead, uh, make sure that you're making us work for our money. Um, feel free to ask us about anything or whomever you're going to be getting these services from. Don't just take word of mouth. If you go straight to the source, you can ask more questions. For instance, the hours of operation, um, if those are changing because of a holiday, and what services are available. Like I said, that little scanner kit can be checked out. We can also do reservations, so that's a wonderful service that we provide. And of course, if you're interested, they can give you a general estimate of how much time it will take to scan. Don't forget to ask about parking, upcoming events, and construction. All of these things can factor into having a very miserable time, unfortunately. I know, for instance, our campus can have a lot of things going on, and it's quite the epic journey to come in. So I always suggest giving extra time and preparing ahead, especially if you have a reservation. Make sure that you get there with extra time to spare, so then you can relax and you can get ready, and then we can teach you to use our equipment. So these are just kind of the factors that you can work on ahead of time, just to reiterate them. So to save your time for scanning, you can make these decisions before you come. Talk about file format and naming conventions and your folder organization. And of course, cleaning your materials. All these things can be done at home. So in review, these are some of the points that I wanted to go over with you again, so you can see these. So just remember what we talked about and tell me if you have any questions.
Okay, well, if anybody has any questions, feel free to write those in now. Jessica has a lot of experience with these scanners, and it would be great for um, any possible questions that you might have. So I know that it's probably hard for a lot of people to come into BYU because it is a very localized place. Not everyone lives in Provo, so it doesn't make it very easy sometimes. But I imagine that a lot of these tips can be applied to your local area. If you go to a library to use scanners there, knowing how to prepare in advance makes a big difference. So there is a couple questions here. Um, so the first one is from Colleen. It says, "Have you used a Flip Pal scanner?"
Hi, Colleen. I have not used the Flip Pal. I saw it on at Roots Tech. It seemed a little interesting. Most of the things we work with here have to stand up to a lot of work. We ask them to give us their best, so we haven't invested in those. Personally, I have a small Epson scanner slash printer at home, and that's what I use. I have considered using it, but I haven't gotten to it yet. Does that answer your question?
And the other question is from Cassandra. It says, "Is there a way to batch rename?"
Hi, Cassandra. Yes, there is. The one that I'm most familiar with is using IrfanView, that free program that I talked about briefly. I'm considering doing a webinar on IrfanView just because it can be a little tricky and overwhelming, but it does have that capability. And once you can break it down, it does make a lot more sense. So just look back in the slides and find that name, IrfanView.
And then one other question from Kathleen. Can TIFF be converted to JPEG at a later date? Does it matter how high resolution it is if you are posting scans on memory section on Family Search?
I meant to look this up beforehand. I do know that they have Sorry, they have a maximum memory option on Family Search. I want to say it's 15 megabytes, even though that sounds crazy high. You can convert TIFF to JPEG at a later date. You can do it by saving using the Save As function. When you just open that file up, going up to File and clicking Save As, you can usually change the file format there. Or if you want to do a batch conversion, you can use OrphanView for that as well. Any other questions?
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today. If you do have any other questions, feel free to write those in now. And we also have our polls at the bottom of the screen. If you didn't get a chance to answer those at the beginning, we'd ask you to do so now. And we also have a place for some feedback. So let us know how we're doing, what we can do to improve our webinar program, and we'd love to hear from you. This webinar is being recorded, and you can look for it on our BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. Also, if you go to the website here, you'll be able to find a list of all of the recordings as well, along with our monthly schedule. So we thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.
Hi, Kathleen. I saw that you posted another question. You said that you scan many documents at FHL in Salt Lake City, so the Family History Library, and that you save it as a JPEG. Should you save it as a TIFF for written documents, not photos? For written documents, I would usually suggest actually PDF and stay away from multi-page TIFF for certain. I didn't even mention it because I was afraid to open a bag of cats. Like I said, it's always personal preference. You can save it as a TIFF just fine. If there's ever a question, I usually suggest people to either have a TIFF as a master copy or have a JPEG as a master copy and then make other copies to edit from. But like I said, I think either should work just fine for you. Does that answer your question? Got a follow-up here. Yes, sorry, Kathleen, you can convert JPEG to TIFF. You can do that using the Save As function when you open up the image viewer. So if you open up an image viewer window, so for instance, Windows Picture Viewer or anything like that, up in the top left corner, you're going to see the File option. And if you click on that, you're going to see the Save As option button. And so if you click on that, it's going to open up as another window for that Save As, right? Telling you where you're going to save it. If you go down to the bottom of that small pop-up window, you can actually usually change the file format on that second field there. It'll be a drop-down and you can have all sorts of varieties. So give that a try. Any last calls? Oh, okay, so going back to your previous question, Kathleen, about the many documents of family history in Salt Lake, you said that these are small cards. It depends if you want those cards to be associated with each other or separate. Yeah, JPEG can be easier to view. It's a lot faster because it doesn't take as much time to view it, as much processing, because they're smaller files.
Okay, we love having all the questions. Thank you very much. And if there's anything else we can do to clarify anything, feel free to write in any questions we have now. Also, you can call into the library here and get your questions answered at a later date. You can come back and watch the recording. And if you live close enough, you can come in and visit us. We'd love to come see you and be able to help you in person. So we thank you very much for joining us and hope to see you on Thursday.